Colonel Philip Corso, now deceased, is known by many people for his expose of the events surrounding the Roswell event. We include some of his testimony here because not only his role, but his information is corroborated by other witnesses who were present either at that event or at subsequent events involving the retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles or extraterrestrial biological entities. He served as a staff member of Eisenhower's National Security Council. No one has been able to contradict his testimony or the essential fact that he dealt directly with the technological, reverse engineering projects and transfer of technologies from the study of these extraterrestrial debris.
I was a duty officer that night, and I went to the veterinarian section, and one of a sergeant I knew very well was sergeant of the guard that night. I told him, "Sarge, how's everything around here?" And he said, "Fine, sir." I told him, "You know, they told me to be careful to watch this area because you have a sense of something sensitive here." He said, "You want to see it, sir?" I told him, "Yeah, let's go look." And I knew this sergeant very, he was a master sergeant. I went back, and there was 5 crates there, like 5 or 6, I think it was 5. I lifted one up, and here's this body there and floating in fluid. First I thought it was a child because it was small. Then I looked at this head and all, right away, and this was only happened in a matter of seconds. Then I put the end back down, and the head was different, the arms were spindly, the body, it was gray. So right at that moment I figured, I don't know what this thing is. So like an intelligence business, I just better put it in the back of my head here and wait till maybe in the future I get corroboration so I can evaluate what it is. And I told him, "Where did it come from, Sarge?" He said, "Well, 5 trucks are coming through here from an airfield in New Mexico, and they're heading for Wright-Patterson Air Force." There I started getting the topsy reports. I started getting other crash reports, the artifacts I got. And I did get one time a report that NSA was getting signals from space, which were not just space noise or or unscrambled or something you couldn't read. They were really very perfect and looked like something was guiding them. There was a real message, but we were never able to decode it. This was a very coordinated message. It wasn't space noise or jam or jumble mumble or anything like that, or just noise coming. It was a pattern. When we gave the information out, we gave it out and insisted they take the patents. But also we put a little bit of a requirement on there. Requirement, feed it back to us for the competitive edge of the Army. Take the patents, make all the money you want, but give it to the American people and give it to the world. The Japanese, they interviewed me, and I told them when we put the integrated circuit out, we also gave it to you.
He made a comment that was really funny at that particular point. I didn't really connect it with anything until later. He says, "You have no idea at all what we're about, do you?" And I told him, "No, sir, I don't." He says, "Well, someday the technology will be out there that has been totally back-engineered." Went right over my head at that particular point.
A lot of this has been well documented by Colonel Corso. You know, who was there with him? Well, there were a lot of people there with him. But a lot of the things that are said in the book or documented in the book by the How for Corso, I can verify, corroborated by the people that I have worked with and do work with now.
I read Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. In the book he said a lot of fantastic things, and he also said near the end of the book that there was a base on the backside of the moon. And when he said that, I said, aha. So I began to believe that everything he was saying was true. And he was saying a lot of really profound things about the crash in Roswell and alien technology and whatever, and how it had been mainstreamed through the Office of Foreign Technology by himself. So I knew that he was probably telling the truth.
He also had fiber optics laying there. They didn't know what these things were. They figured they were wires of some sort, but didn't know how they operate. The interesting thing that shows you that we have not achieved the point of where these fiber optics are is my dad would also hold them in his hand, and when he closed his hand around them, the ends would be glowing. So this means they contain their own energy.
Okay, well, why would you need a fiber optic system in a spaceship? Well, okay, if suddenly everything in the vehicle suddenly becomes mass canceled, and even the electrons become mass canceled, it means that all of the telemetry that's going through your system is going to go out of haywire. It's going to be like suddenly the system goes through a phase change and everything's superconducting. Why use fiber optics? Because photons have no mass, supposedly. So they're unaffected. So it means that any information, any telemetry that you send back and forth to your computer, it doesn't matter if the computer functions at a superconducting level because it just makes it faster, more efficient, smarter. But you want to be able to control the aircraft so it doesn't crash. What's the best way to do it with fiber optics?
The one person I happened to meet and took quite a shine to, and he to me, was a Dr. Adolf Raum. Just for a little background on him, he was from Switzerland originally. He was on their first A-bomb test in the U.S. He knew Dr. Oppenheimer personally, and just a fine, fine gentleman. One night after supper and after a few martinis, I jokingly asked Adolf, I said, what do you know about the little gray men that are supposedly on ice here at Wright-Patterson? And I can distinctly recall his face turning ashen white. His voice got very stern, and he said, Arnie, he says, all I can tell you is that they were not weather balloons, and we will not talk about it again. You understand? And there was no uncertainty in my mind that we wouldn't talk about this further.
And then Curtis LeMay started to open up and talk about what he told me about Roswell and the crash that had occurred. And he told me that he was aware that it wasn't ours, it wasn't the military's, the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, and that was highly strange. It was a highly strange vehicle that crashed.
He said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, but if you say that I told you, I'll swear I never even mentioned it to you. I said, no problem. And he said to me, you know I'm a member of General Douglas MacArthur's security guard. He says, I'm on my way to the States for TDY. He said, I'm going to tell you something. General Douglas MacArthur was very familiar with the Roswell incident, the crash material, and also the bodies, because he himself has seen them.
It just, my sincere feeling is that the thing was something from outer space, and we decided that, I say we, the military decided that our public may not accept it very graciously.
When I arrived at the base, where I usually back up to this ramp and unload the patients, there was 3 field Army Air Force ambulance backed up against the ramp. And so I had to swing around. But anyway, we were walking up the ramp and I saw a lot of debris. And so when I got in and checked him in, got all the vouchers and everything signed, I said, this captain there, and I said, sir, it looked like we had a crash. I need to get ready for it. And who in the hell are you and what are you doing here? And I said, well, I had an emergency and we have the contract for all military services. It looks like you had a crash. He just said, stay right here, don't move. And so I stayed there, and pretty soon he came back with 2 military police and said, get this guy off of the base, he's not supposed to be here.
We can safely say that, yes, there were some captured craft in Roswell, New Mexico, and yeah, they were real. And yes, we really did get some technology from them. And yes, we really did put it to work.
I think they made a mistake at Roswell. Rather than admitting it, they covered it.
John Wygant is a lance corporal in the Marines. He's a young man who was very frightened to come forward, but felt that he could not remain silent anymore. In 1997, he was stationed at a secret facility in Peru when one of these extraterrestrial vehicles was apparently targeted and hit. It crashed, and he was one of the first people on site to see the device and to describe it. He has come forward even though he has been severely threatened and intimidated.
One day, Sergeant Allen and the other sergeant, and I'll remember his name soon, Sergeant Atkins. They were, and Sergeant Montalegre, and they came to us and said, "Look, you know, we got a situation where we have an aircraft crash that's possibly friendly, and they need us to go and secure the crash site." And well, we found the area really easy because there was a huge gash in the land where something had crashed. Everything was burned, and it was like if you had almost cut like a warm butter with a knife. I mean, it was just, it's like something on fire or had or some kind of energy, like a laser almost had like gutted. I mean, it was really strange, and basically we were the first ones to see the object. And basically what happened is we didn't go straight up the hill, because basically this thing went up the hill and then off into the side of the ravine or the ridge. This is about a 200-foot ridge at least. It was buried in the side of the cliff. But anyway, we didn't go straight up. We went on to the left and walked up to the top of the ridge. And that's when we saw the craft. Basically, this is a huge ship, and 10 meters in width and about 20 meters in length. I'm just not sure. That's just an estimate from what I remember. But it was huge. I mean, it was big, man. And it was shaped like almost like between an egg and like a teardrop almost. And when I first saw it, you know, I was scared. It scared the heck out of me. You know, I didn't know what to do, and it was dripping this syrup-like syrup viscosity, this liquid. It was everywhere, all down everywhere when we went down there, because there was plants and everything. And it was weird. It was a purplish green color, and it kind of like fluctuated. Like you couldn't really, when you'd look at it one time, then you look at it again, and it would it's almost like it. I don't know if it was like alive and it was just changing, but every time you looked at it, you saw a different shade of greenish purple. It was strange. There was one light on it that slowly went around, and the machine, I could hear it. I could hear, I guess because it was still functioning, and it had like a hum to it, like a really bass, like say if you unplugged an amp from a guitar, that kind of, it was really, it was really deep, and it kind of fluctuated, and then finally it just cut off, and everything just seemed to stop. When I was looking at the craft, it was buried, so I could see the back of it, and there were these large vents. Well, they look like vents, sort of like a fish gill on the back. I couldn't see around the other side, and I guess I'm assuming that it was the same way on the other side. That looked like, I don't know, that could have been used for propulsion. I'm not sure. You know, in Stinger School, they teach you about all different kinds of aircraft and stuff like that. And I knew a lot of aircraft anyway, because I like reading about aircraft and data and that stuff. And well, essentially, when I saw it, I'm like, man, this is nothing that I know of, because I had been in the command center there at the radar installation, and I heard a couple women there in the Air Force talking about aircraft flying in and out of the atmosphere at Mach 10 plus.
And that was happening.
Oh, this is happening all the time. There's like 3 or 4 incidents where I was duty there that the same Air Force officer came in there to get books. The reason, I guess the reason they were taking them is they didn't want people to know that they're tracking these aircraft. I guess, I mean, again, I'm just assuming that.
Well, I was at Wright-Patterson, of course. I was approached by an individual that, and I'm not going to mention his name, to determine if I wanted to work in an area on just new creative things, okay? And apparently that was the flying disc simulator. What they had done, they had selected several of us, and they reassigned me to Link Aviation, which was a simulator manufacturer. The simulator wasn't actually functional until around 1958, where the simulator was actually operable. Craft that they used to build, which is a 30-meter one, was the one that crashed in Arizona, Kingman, Arizona, back in 53 or 52. We operated with 6 large capacitors that were charged with 1 million volts each. Say there were 6 million volts in those capacitors. They're largest capacitors ever built. In a simulator now, you'll notice that there are no seat belts, right? And the same thing with the actual craft, no seat belts. You don't need seat belts, because when you fly one of these things upside down, there's no upside down like in a regular aircraft. You have your own gravitational field right inside. So if you're flying upside down, to you, you're right side up. We had a long period of introduction into meeting, you know, say an EVE, an alien. And I called him J-Rod. Of course, that's what they called him, but that wasn't his, you know, I don't know if that was his real name or not, but that's the name that the linguist gave him. He used to come in with Teller and some of the other guys occasionally on questions that maybe we'd have, you know. But you got to understand that everything was, you know, specific to the group. If it wasn't specific to the group, you couldn't talk about it.
Larry Warren was a security officer at Bentwaters Air Force Base in the United Kingdom. He is an American, and this was an American facility. He was present during the event in 1980 when an extraterrestrial vehicle landed, hovered, and interacted with Air Force personnel at Bentwaters. His testimony is corroborated by events that happened at the same facility by Lori Rayfield, whom you'll hear from later, as well as by multiple other military witnesses whom have been identified. There are official documents related to this event, there is a photograph related to the event, and there is physical landing trace evidence and reports. This entire event is also corroborated by another witness, Ministry of Defense official Nick Pope, as well as 5-star Admiral and Sea Lord and former Ministry of Defense head Lord Hill Norton.
We pulled up, there were some other vehicles. There was an armorer's vehicle. They took our weapons off us. Each weapon is assigned by number anyway, and it's with you for your whole assignment. And that was taken away from us. We broke up into 4-man units. We headed down a trail into the forest. Charles Holt was out there at that night with a smaller party of senior people. Lieutenant England joined them at one point. Came to a clearing called Capel Green at the end of the Corsican Pine. And there was a phenomena on the ground in this field. It was like a mist. It looked like a fog on the ground. I saw a light come in. We could see the beam of the Orford Lighthouse in this clearing, by the way, very clearly. This case has been written off as a misidentification of this lighthouse, an exaggeration or whatever. In reality, that it was there for over 100 years and was no surprise to anyone. This object, a red basketball-shaped object, came in from the North Sea area over the trees. I thought it was a taillight on an aircraft. It moved so quickly that it came in over the trees. I go to this site all the time and I see it as clear as day. Did a a downward arc over Capel Green, came to a point over this mist. Now, it's been misrepresented. There was a mist on the ground. It appeared to have structure. It was 50 foot across. This basketball-sized amber light, it didn't seem solid, I couldn't tell you what it was 20 feet above the object, this mist. There was an explosion. This is described, it's very hard for me to describe it. It was this thing broke up into multiple shards of extremely bright light. I and others suffered, and I have documents of this because I stole them from Bentwaters because an officer advised me to, because he said, your military record is going to vaporize as soon as you're gone. My eyes were damaged, flash burns to the retinas and all. This is established as if I'd stared at an arc welder's torch for about 10 minutes, which is unadvisable. Everything was very bizarre at that point. In the place of this explosion of light, very silent, there was no sound, anything, was a structured, solid object, rather large, probably 30 feet at the base, to a pyramid-type shape, no windows, flags on it. It was very rough. It was distorted as you looked at it, with a rainbow-like effect, and yet through peripheral vision you could get a fix. I was at least 30 feet away from it at one point. Too close. This bright light moved out. It was bluish gold. It was about a foot off the ground. It split, and it was only about 4 feet in height from the ground up, but it split away, and 3 individual kind of oblong cocoons of light with this thing in it. These 3 individual things inside it, and these things had an upper body I clearly saw and when I saw an arm, what I perceived to be arms move, I'm like, you're in another place at that point. There's witnesses are coming out now saying, unbeknownst to us, there were 3 massive triangular objects over the base, over the forest, and over the Woodbridge base the whole time.
We thought it was just regular aircraft coming in, and we looked over at the runway, waiting for the lights to go on, figuring, well, the aircraft coming in, and then all of a sudden it just stops in midair, and then all of a sudden it just moves up, down, left, right, and then it breaks into like 3 pieces and speeds across the runway. And now we're stunned. We're like, what was that?
All these years later, from 1988 to 9, we have done core samples, soil analysis, many of this stuff analyzed by Springborn Environmental Labs in Massachusetts by accredited scientists, but it is phenomenal. Absolute phenomena took place only in that spot to a level of 3 feet down. Plants do not grow in this one spot, no matter what crop. We've talked to the farmers for 20 years. However, the soil is darker. It does not absorb water. There was evidence left by this encounter, pod indentations on the ground. Podcasts were made for the indentations. Charles Holt still has possession of one of them and does show people this, and would show it to any congressional body, I think, when it comes to were there radar returns. On all nights in question, RAF Watton on the 3rd night and the 1st night picked up, their eastern radar, by the way, picked up an object over Rendlesham Forest descending into the forest.
Britain's most famous UFO case is the Rendlesham Forest incident, which is sometimes also referred to as the Bentwaters case. Now, all the witnesses to this are military personnel. They're trained observers. They don't make mistakes. Some of the skeptics have suggested that this could have been a mistaken sighting of a nearby lighthouse. That's nonsense for 2 reasons. Firstly, these were trained military observers who actually were familiar with the lighthouse and saw it pretty much every night of their tour of duty. But secondly, certainly at one point in the encounter, the lighthouse was clearly visible at the same time as the UFO. Now, one of the things that was done was that the area was checked for radiation, and this is where I came in. I took the readings that were taken, and it's important to say these readings peaked in 2 places. They peaked in the indentations themselves, and also some damage that was done to the sides of the trees in the clearing. I sent the data from Holt and his team to the Defence Radiological Protection Service, which is part of the Ministry of Defence. And they came back to me and they were frankly bemused by this whole thing, and they said that the radiations from the indentations in the ground were 10 times background for that area, 10 times what they should have been.
Bentwaters is another very interesting case. With Bentwaters, we went there to digest some of the information as far as the physical evidence there. There were photographs, there was film footage, there was evidence of high background radiation, or a higher than normal background radiation, not all that high, but above normal. We found that there was some abnormalities in the area of which we referred to the impact point. We also noticed that the trees had been leveled off at the top. As far as sightings, it was picked up on radar. Both the British government and the U.S. government were aware of these sightings. The hard evidence that we had was taken back to Lindsay Air Force Base, and that the material was transferred on to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, headquarters at the time of the U.S. Air Force's Special Field Activities Group.
I know a good bit about the Bentwaters incident, and I've read half a dozen books. I've interviewed a number of the people who took part in it. And what I have decided, after careful thought, and I have said it in public more than once before, there are only two explanations for what happened that night in Suffolk. The first is that what the people concerned, including Colonel Holt, who was at the time the deputy commander of the base, and a lot of his soldiers, or airmen, they claim that something from outside the Earth's atmosphere landed at their Air Force base. They went and stood by it, they inspected it, they photographed it. The following day they took tests on the ground where it had been and found radioactive traces. That is one explanation, that it actually happened, as Colonel Holt reported. The other explanation is that it didn't. And in that case, one is bound to assume that Colonel Holt and all his men were hallucinating. My position is perfectly clear. Either of those explanations is of the utmost defense interest. Surely, to any sensible person, either of those explanations must be, cannot fail to be, of defense interest. That the colonel of an American Air Force base in Suffolk and his merry men are hallucinating when there are nuclear-armed aircraft on the base must be of defense interest.
Major George Filer was an Air Force intelligence officer who not only had an extraordinary encounter with a massive UFO on radar over the United Kingdom, but later, in the 1970s, while he was at the McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, came in one morning to find that an extraterrestrial biological entity had been shot and killed at Fort Dix and had come over to adjacent McGuire Air Force Base, where it died and was on the tarmac. And he will testify that this life form was then picked up and taken back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
We were flying tankers over England, and London Control asked us to intercept a UFO. And we happened to be done with our refueling mission, and you know, we accepted the assignment. We were on just over the North Sea, and they asked us to fly to the center of England. And we got about, I'm not exactly sure, 20, 30 miles out, and I got it on radar. And it was a very large return. And obviously London Control had it on their radar, and they were vectoring us to this object. And when we got about a mile from it, as a matter of fact, we were diving on the thing, and the whole aircraft was shaking. And it just took off into space.
several thousand miles an hour. And this particular morning when I went into the command post, I was met by the head of the command post, and he said it's been a very exciting evening, that we've had UFOs in the, over the McGuire all night, and that one had apparently landed or possibly crashed at Fort Dix, and that when a military policeman came upon the alien, that he had pulled out a gun and shot them. And I said, a foreigner, like, an alien? I was a little bit confused by him saying alien. He says, no, an alien from outer space. He was very specific about the fact that an alien from outer space had been shot at Fort Dix, and that it had run away after being wounded and headed for McGuire. Now, McGuire and Fort Dix just have a fence between them, and this alien supposedly climbed the fence or went under it or whatever and got to McGuire and died out on the end of the runway. And that the security police were out there and had captured the body, so to speak, and were guarding it. And he said that a C-141 from Wright-Patterson was coming in to pick up the plane. So I was like, my gosh, what's going on here? And he says, we want you to brief this at the, stand-up general briefing this morning and explain what happened to everybody. And I was like, do you want me to tell General Tom Sadler and everybody in the command post that, we captured an alien? Almost every day I went to the photo lab, because in your briefings you have, 4 screens, and you have to keep them all, filled up with pretty pictures and so on. And there they indicated that they had taken pictures of something extraordinary. And I said, well, let me see them. And the sergeant was handing it to me, and his master sergeant says he can't see those. So all I know is that they had some pictures that I wasn't allowed to see. But normally, being the general's briefer, I had never been, stopped from seeing any pictures that they had previously. Now, one interesting thing is many of the key personnel on the base at that time who had a connection to this, with this, were quickly transferred from the wing commander on down.
Sergeant Clifford Stone has worked as a specialist within various divisions of Army operations dealing with the retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles. He recounts how he has specifically seen extraterrestrial bodies and been involved in the retrieval of materiel from more than one extraterrestrial vehicle which has been downed or which has crashed. His testimony, again, is corroborated by others, such as Colonel Corso, regarding the fact that we have indeed retrieved extraterrestrial devices and studied them within our projects.
MacArthur organized what was called the Interplanetary Phenomena Research Unit. It would later be taken over by General Marshall, and it continued all the way through to present day. Names have been changed. Records still haven't surfaced. The Army tries to state that it was not an official organization effort to try to investigate UFOs, but it was organized by a general. It bore fruit. It came to conclusions that was not popular, i.e. interplanetary spacecraft. And they continued to do exactly what they do today, and that is to be part of a multi-intelligent operation in the recovery of objects of unknown origin, particularly those that are of non-earthly origin, and to assess that information, get raw field intelligence data, and process that data into some type of useful intelligence product to disseminate to the field to those people who have a need to know, and those people that are the, shall we say, the keepers of that information. In the 1950s, the United States Air Force had an elite unit to investigate UFOs outside of Blue Book, even though Blue Book thought that that unit was working with them, that they were not. This unit was initially organized as the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron. Among its peacetime missions was Operation Blue Fly. Operation Blue Fly was to recover objects of unknown origin that fell to Earth. It's very important that you remember objects that fell to Earth because we didn't have any spacecraft up there at this time. Later it would be expanded in 1957 to cover all objects of unknown or all objects of unknown origin, and it would become part of what they would call in the 1957 October time frame Project Moondust. In short, under Moondust, under Blue Fly, we have recovered alien debris, not of this Earth. You have an airplane accident. We have standard procedures on how we handle that. Those same procedures are utilized when you do a recovery or extraction of a crashed spacecraft or debris thereof. And I have to stress debris simply because these are highly advanced technical machines. There were not that many crashes. They're flawable because they are made by an intelligence that is as mortal as you and I. Us being mortal, we are subject to error. Now, the way you package the material, if it's just debris, is handled the same way you would if it was hazardous material. You took precautions. If you had a whole craft, you took very serious precautions, because while I still state they are not hostile, but you could cause some serious accidents which would result in death. We were informed that there had only been a couple dozen, tops. That there were several in the 40s, in the early 50s. And once again, to make it perfectly clear about those events that took place there, I mean, it sounds crazy, but their guidance system, our radar wreaked havoc on. And they had to make adjustments to their guidance systems for that.
What happened was we found out that high power radar would interfere with their stability, because we could watch the amplifiers and stabilizers come down when it was low and slow, and radar affected them when it was low and slow.
How many bodies had been recovered? Don't know. How many crashes have occurred in which we only got debris from because they came and did their recovery before we got there? Don't know, but it has happened. It has happened. When they have problems, just like we send out a distress call, they send out a distress call, which is something that a lot of people don't allude to or don't even, it's the one question that's never asked. But here again, we think of them as something intangible, like that stuffed animal there. But they're living, breathing creatures, as mortal as you and I. They think, they have loves, they have likes, they have dislikes, they have social culture. This is so important to try to make people understand that that is the case.
This section of the briefing is regarding secrecy. How secrecy works. How have these projects worked? Some years ago, a military advisor of mine explained to me something called an Unacknowledged Special Access Project, or USAP. This is a project which, while compartmented and which requires special access, is also unacknowledged. And what that means is that no one outside of that compartmented area of operation is told about it. And it doesn't matter if the person is the President of the United States, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I have, over the past 8 years, had the responsibility, unwelcome, I might add, on my part, of having to brief a sitting CIA director on this issue, a sitting head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, an admiral who headed up the J2 position, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as other senior people within the Congress, the Senate, the United Nations, and foreign governments. I have found that for the most part, these high officials have known nothing about these compartmented special access projects which are unacknowledged and which deal with this issue.
People in high-level government have very, very little, if any, information, valid information about this. Most have no more knowledge than the man in the street.
One area of the maintenance of these unacknowledged special access projects, which is very disconcerting, was highlighted by a 60 Minutes piece some years ago on CBS News, where it talked about a company called E-Systems, and the manner in which E-Systems was sort of a hybrid entity which was quasi-governmental and quasi-private corporate. We have found that that is a motif which is repeated over and over again throughout the last 50 years, that certain projects have been compartmented within the corporate work for other sector, the contracting sector, and that those projects are related to deep cover, unacknowledged projects within the military and the intelligence community.
Well, I opened up the files and all there was is form letters, maybe 2 or 3. And yet these contracts were several years old. And even the letters that were in there were backdated several years, saying the same exact form letter. It's being worked on, blah, blah, blah. And it was talking about millions of, sometimes millions of dollars. And all of them were 6 figures and up. Really? I thought they were getting a lot of money for doing nothing, and I didn't know where that money was going. It's like a front for something. I mean, if it wasn't such a big complex and evidently well known, which I found out, as I worked there, I would have been very suspicious of what was going on. I wasn't there long. One of the supervisors caused a situation that was completely uncomfortable for me to stay there shortly thereafter, and I left. I was sexual harassment, but he had never bothered me before this.
Depending on the level of the compartmentalization and the secrecy level, you have to go through a fairly significant background check. It takes between 6 months to a year to get the background checks. And then when you do that, then you generally, if you're in a very tight compartment, then you have to sign a statement that you will not divulge the existence of the project or even answer a question that could divulge the existence of the project. And it's not even on a need-to-know basis. It's on a basis of people being identified specifically to know what you're working on and directly associated with the project. If you have a covert project, the funding would come through a number of government sources, none of which would be identified to the workers. It's just that you sign a contract with the U.S. government and the funding would show up at the right place at the right time. There's a large number of covert projects that go on in the United States that none of us are ever aware of. I mean, I know people today that worked on one of the things that I worked on, that if you asked them, do you recognize this name, they would, even if I can show it to you on the internet, there's some things that have come up recently on the internet where some of the stuff that I was associated with, their names are now on the internet. They would say, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. In their 70s now. But they still absolutely would never admit that they even know what you're talking about. So you don't know. You have no idea. But it's probably larger than you think.
Somewhere along the line, they may see that material and realize there's some very highly sensitive information that would have damning effect upon the national security of the United States should it become compromised. It requires to be further protected, to ensure that there is only a limited access to that information to a small number of people. So small you can put them on a list of paper or on a piece of paper and list them by name. Thus you have the special access programs. The controls that were supposed to be put on the special access programs are not there. When it comes to UFOs, the same criteria applies. The problem we have right now is that that event, i.e. the ultimate contact, where there is no longer a question about the reality of other beings in the universe coming here, that event has not taken place. Therefore, but a small nucleus within the intelligence community, numbering less than 100, and I'd suggest less than 50, control all that information. It is not subject to congressional review by the Information Security Oversight at all. We have got to get the documentation as it exists in the government files. We have got to get it released before it ultimately comes up being destroyed. As soon as we open a door, and we're right there, we're about to bust open the door. Good case is the Blue Book file, or the Blue Fly and Moondust files. I had classified documents. The Air Force acknowledged. When I got members of Congress to help me, they were immediately destroyed, and I can prove this. During the discussion of UFOs, the question ultimately is going to come up, can any government keep secrets, let alone the U.S. government? And the answer to that is unequivocally yes. But one of the greatest weapons the intelligence community has at their disposal is a predisposition by the American people, the American politicians, and I hate to call them debunkers, but we'll call them debunkers, people who wish to try to debunk UFO information. They immediately come out, oh, we can't keep secrets, we can't keep secrets. Well, the whole situation is, yes, we can. I am prepared to state that I have been at locations where craft of unknown origin that did not originate on the face of this planet was there. I am prepared to state that while I was there, we saw living, dead bodies of entities that were not born on this planet. I am prepared to state that we had what they referred to as interfacing with those entities. I am prepared to state that the situation is they have a school to try to indoctrinate people. I never went to that school. I always refused. I am prepared to state that when I got out of the service in 1990, that they held me for 2 months, that I might better reconsider to stay in and not get out. That they revoked those orders, once again in violation of law, to hold me for 2 months pending approval of my retirement, which had already been approved. The purpose of that was to try to convince me to stay in. We have contact with aliens not originating from some foreign country, but from some other solar system. And I have been a party to that.
There's always been what they call the need to know. And even myself, I had a top secret crypto clearance. And I could go into areas where my commanders, some commanders could not even get involved with. They can't get in there because they don't have the need to know, even though they have the same clearance as the guy that gets to go in there. So the UFO secrets can be kept secret from other people who have the same security clearance or the same level of security.
A government is widespread, as everybody knows. I mean, it's into everybody's pockets and everybody's life all over the place, and the same thing holds true for the UFO extraterrestrial, if you want to look at it that way. But very, very few people really know the full knowledge of what's going on. It's held very tightly within black covert operations. They keep pretty much each organization an island unto itself. You don't have cross departmentalization a lot within the programs. TRW, Johnson Controls, Honeywell, all of them at some point or another became involved with the intelligence field. Certain works, some of Phil Corso's early back engineering projects. If you will look into those, Atlantic Research was one of them, way back. Entities that were created out of people in the Pentagon to become a quote-unquote Beltway bandit. Received projects, grants, and monies to do certain projects that were so highly classified, even though there was only a top secret, but so compartmentalized that only about 4 people would know what was going on. But as far as UFO and intelligence and extraterrestrial goes, it's right at the top. And I would say that the president has such limited knowledge of it. I know Carter did not have any knowledge whatsoever. And I worked right there with the organization, President Carter's organization. And the truth is, they have hidden things like UFO and extraterrestrial information from us for years. Not just the current era, but back before the 1900s.
Dan Salter is a retired Air Force career man, E9, Master Sergeant, who was involved in the extraterrestrial issue for many, many years. He later, after leaving the Air Force, was recruited into the super secret National Reconnaissance Organization, or NRO, during which time he worked specifically on extraterrestrial matters and the retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles and the management of this subject. He had a cosmic top secret clearance, top secret cosmic compartmentalization, which he states no U.S. president, to his knowledge, has ever held.
There's about 38 levels above top secret. The highest is cosmic. That's, okay, I'll tell you right off now, that's UFOs, aliens, and particleization. Now, like you heard a while ago, there's only probably about 25 people in the world that know things that are known at that level. No president has had that level, has ever been cleared for that level. Eisenhower was the closest. One that did not exist, it was so secret, was the NRO. You couldn't mention NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization.
NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, basically run by the Air Force. The Reconnaissance Office, from my understanding of people that I've had contacts with since I retired, has taken on a lot more responsibility, particularly towards UFO and extraterrestrial activities. Almost you could say that they picked up where Blue Book dropped off.
Eisenhower wanted somebody to be in charge. He tried the CIA director, and it didn't work. CIA was working primarily for itself. Most of the intelligence directors of the services were working for themselves. So he said, I want it to be independent. I want it to be civilian. I want it to be some of our top scientists. And so it was organized under the name, the NRO. If you're on that level, there's an organization worldwide called ACIO. That's Alien Contact Intelligence Organization. If you pay your dues and you follow the rules, you can benefit, your government is allowed to benefit from that organization's information. But we've been successful. We crashed in White Sands, New Mexico. We tracked it We was tracking it at the time, and we were successful in damaging it enough where it crashed. And yes, there were some aliens on it, and yes, we got them.
This next witness we only call by the initials A.H. He is filmed from the back because he does not wish to be identified yet. He specifically talked with Curtis LeMay about the crash in New Mexico of one of these extraterrestrial vehicles prior to Curtis LeMay's death. General LeMay confirmed the existence of this extraterrestrial vehicle. He is also, as a Boeing aerospace employee, connected to a number of intelligence and aerospace figures who have deep knowledge of this subject. This is the only witness who will be presented here who is not identified. But it is important that his testimony be taken seriously because he confirms many of the accounts that we have from other corroborating sources, and his own bona fides, which I have seen, are substantial.
And I asked Curtis LeMay, and I said, Kurt, and I said, when you were in the Air Force, out of the 100% of sightings that came into the Air Force, how many of them were not identified? And he said, out of the 100% that came in, only 35% of them could not be identified. And I asked him, well, why couldn't they have been identified? And he said, because the craft, they're too damn fast. We can't catch them. And then I asked him about the Roswell crash, if that really occurred. And he looked over at me and he shook his head, yes, that it did occur. And he told me that he was aware that it wasn't ours, it wasn't the military's, the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, and it was highly strange. It was a highly strange vehicle that crashed. And I said I was particularly interested in the strange writings that were found inside. And I said, were they ever deciphered? And he said, far as he understood, they were not deciphered. There were more crashes than Roswell that people don't understand is that there was one in 1948 and there was another one in 1949. The radar testing in New Mexico was the cause of a lot of them that were crashing, and high-powered transmitters, when they would get too close to transmitters, it would interfere with their guidance control and they would just crash. And other craft that crashed, we had shot them down. I've met a gentleman that was in the Army, in the CID, that was involved with several crash recoveries when he was in the CID. And apparently he saw some of the aliens and witnessed the craft. One of the military officers said, he goes, gentlemen, we're not here on a Hollywood movie set. This is a highly classified mission. You're not even supposed to talk to your family about this. And they had to sign security oath statements that they would not talk about this for 50 years. Later on at Area 51 in the late 1960s, all crash debris and technology and anything that had to do with the alien-connected phenomenon all went to Area 51. Most of the major defense contractors have something to do with Area 51. Lockheed Martin, Boeing Aircraft, they do trucking for Area 51, Boeing Aircraft. Hughes, we're incorporating this technology from these craft that Area 51. And I also found out that they are moving a lot of the personnel and some of the equipment and some of the extraterrestrial technology equipment and the craft to base up in Utah. And they just try to sweep it right under the rug. And this is what Robert Friend told me, that the whole project was to get as much information and technology out of these crafts as fast as they could, and to steer the news media off on some crazy idea that these sightings were created by college pranks and balloons and meteorological problems. And a lot of the information was siphoned off by the CIA and the National Security Agency and people at ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. Project Red Light is a program to test these vehicles and extract as much information as possible from the alien connected projects to find out how these things operate and gain as much information to possibly use this for our advancement, for our, like I said, for our fighters and bombers and for our space connected projects. Well, through my NSA contact, he was in the Army. The NSA is a part of the Army. He was in advanced intelligence gathering. He had a top secret Umber clearance. He had told me that the NSA is fully aware of the extraterrestrial presence, and he had received several transmissions from the Pentagon and from other satellite monitoring stations of the NSA that they were tracking ETVs, extraterrestrial, that stands for extraterrestrial vehicles. Basically, that's the information that the NSA is refusing to release regarding the tracking. And they also cooperate back and forth with the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, regarding tracking and intercepts, along with NORAD, the Air Force, and the Army. They're all in on it, and it's all connected with a top secret group called Magi Control. Magi Control is controlled by Office of Naval Intelligence. It's a top secret collection group like the Central Intelligence Agency and the NSA. In fact, the ONI is just like the CIA. It's a top secret organization within the Navy out of ONI to collect top secret information, collect information on foreign dignitaries, foreign leaders, the Alien Connected Project primarily. And Henry Kissinger headed some sort of a study group back in the 50s to study the ramifications of this information if it had leaked through a credible source. In fact, Jimmy Carter was not brought into the loop. They, for some reason, the group, the control group, they don't trust the guy for some reason. They don't trust Jimmy Carter. They were afraid that he would come out and make statements, blanketed statements to the news media. Basically, was controlled by Majestic 12 people, the notorious MJ-12, which is no longer called MJ-12. I'm trying to find out the new name. Basically, it's an oversight group intermingled with the National Security Council and the National Security Planning Group. They have full control. They have no congressional oversight whatsoever. They answer to nobody except for the President of the United States. But they're trying to push it aside away from the President.
He was a civilian, but had done a lot of work with NASA on a lot of committees and what have you. And I think his problem was the fact that he hadn't heard about this as being a real subject. And he knew that he was very important because he was on a lot of committees in NASA. And since he was very important but hadn't heard about this thing, this couldn't be true. And then he said a very curious thing. I wouldn't believe it even if it was real. This is a direct quote from his email to me. I would not believe this even if it was real. I've talked to a number of people who've studied this issue and feel that the, quote, cover-up of this issue that has been going on for the last 50 years is probably the biggest single threat to our democratic society it has ever faced since the Constitution was founded and this country was founded in 1776. We are at a major crossroads in how our society and our democratic society and government function, because this topic is not under control of our elected government, it is not under control of our judicial government. It is under control of others.
The fact that the government, at this point, I know we've been investigating since 1947, has not come up with an answer, to me, indicates that there's something seriously wrong. Are we this incompetent in science? I don't think so. Are we this incompetent in intelligence? I know we're not this incompetent in intelligence. Now, the image put out, Project Blue Book, when it was closed by Dr. Condon's group, I have every reason to believe that this was a total deliberate whitewash. My judgment is that there's an excellent chance that elements of the United States government, for reasons unknown, have failed to advise the public.
After this happened in Oregon, and I came home on leave and told my dad about it, he was red, white, and blue through and through, World War II hero and all this, and very patriotic. And I was explaining to him about these UFOs that we've routinely seen out there. And he said, no, he says, the government says there are no UFOs. And I'm saying, Dad, I've seen these, on radar with my own eyes. And so he was torn. The government would never lie to him. Here's his son. I've never lied to him. So he just didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until years later, after Watergate, that he said, hey, sit down and tell me about this. The government's lying to me.
Dr. Carol Rosin is a former aerospace executive with Fairchild Industries, who worked specifically for the last 4 years of his life with Wernher von Braun. During those years, she learned of what Wernher von Braun knew about this subject, and specifically that weapons in space were being planned many decades ago, and that it was all a hoax, that they would first use the excuse of the Cold War, then of terrorist rogue nations, then of an asteroid, and that the ultimate trump card that they would play would be to hoax an extraterrestrial threat to justify the weaponization of space. Wernher von Braun begged Dr. Rosin to do what she could to keep these weapons out of space because he felt it was enormously dangerous and unwise to move down that perilous path.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late. In 1977, I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries in a conference room called the War Room. And in that room were a lot of charts on the walls with enemies, identified enemies, names that people had never heard of, names like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. But we were talking then about terrorists, the potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before, but this was the next stage after the Russians against whom we were going to build space-based weapons, these terrorists. This is 1977, and they were talking about creating a war in the Gulf region when there was $25 billion in the space-based weapons program that yet had not been identified. It wasn't called the Strategic Defense Initiative, at least, until 1983. This weapons system then had obviously been going on for some time that I didn't know anything about. So I stood up in this meeting in 1977 and it said, I'd like to know why we're talking about space-based weapons against these enemies. I'd like to know more about this. Would somebody tell me what this is about? Nobody answered. They went on with this meeting as though I hadn't said anything. I have concluded that it's based on a few people making a lot of money and gaining power. It's about ego. It's not about our essence and who we really are on the planet and loving each other and being at peace and cooperating, using technologies to solve problems and heal people in the planet. It isn't about that. It's about a few people who really are playing an old, dangerous, costly game for their own pocketbooks and power struggle.
Now, some would like for us to believe and like to develop the idea that the aliens and people are our enemy now, but that's not true. There's no proof that I have ever read in any official document.
Well, if they were hostile, my own knowledge is, and feeling, I don't know about all of them, is that we could have been, with their weaponry as it might be used, it could have destroyed us a long time ago.
The ballistic missile defense system is probably a pipe dream in the sense that if what it's designed for is that you know where it's coming from. And when we had Russia, there was a 50-50 chance that you knew about where it would be coming from. With the rogue nations we have today, it's absolutely ludicrous. In the 50s, they built a nuclear warhead that fit inside a Sparrow, AIM-7 Sparrow, which has an 8-inch diameter body. And that was a 1/4 kiloton weapon. That'll fit inside any briefcase you can think of. Now, the guy may die carrying it, but he's going to die anyway, so what difference does it make? I'm far more feared of that than if beings can travel in time-space, then anything we would put in orbit as a weapon would be like going against Genghis Khan with a firecracker.
Weapons in space is still a big enigma. Black covert operations have always been trying to do something like that. When Star Wars was brought out as an idea, which was before Reagan actually, and incorporated into his administration, it became pretty much a window dressing, as one people would call it, but there was a lot of truth behind what they were trying to do. They knew the basic principle of what they wanted to do. They wanted a weapon system they could put in space that would stop a ballistic missile. That was the concept. Now, if that ballistic missile happened to be coming from another direction other than earthbound, could it do the same thing? Or was it a ballistic missile? You know, concepts were there. Ideas were there.
I have concluded that I'm fighting against the clock, that I have but a short time to try to convince people that we are moving in an avenue where we are going to militarize space. As a result of militarizing space, we are going to acquire new technology. We're going to evolve new technology that's going to lead us into interstellar travel. As a direct result, we will become a threat to them unless we spiritually grow also.
We put nuclear weapons out in space as a line of defense, and we was ready to blow them up if they started in.
I noticed the satellite's positionings. I said, now this is supposed to be a system that tracks radar anomalies on Earth, right? You know, the whole thing, the movement. Yep, that's what it does. And I said, well, why are half of them pointed towards the outer space? Towards the moon, towards areas that are just blank space? Well, I don't know, was the reply. He says, never thought about it. I says, well, at least half of those satellites you got up there aren't looking at Earth. I said, what are they looking for? He says, well, you got to have need to know about that. I said, I see. In other words, who's coming? He says, we don't know. Dropped, end of subject. There was a fear then that of something out there. It became a very big concern. Asteroids, UFOs, people coming from other places. Paranoia was also there within the government. You know, at certain levels, you could feel it. You knew it was happening. Would they tell the truth about it? I doubt it.
So when I hear that there's a possible threat of extraterrestrials, and I look at the history of thousands of years of possible visitations, recorded history, and when I hear now the stories of the disclosures of honest military intelligence industry people who have had experiences with UFOs, with crashes and landings, with live or dead bodies of extraterrestrial beings, people from out in the universes. And if I'm ever told that these are enemies against whom we have to build space-based weapon systems, based on my own personal experience of having worked in the military-industrial complex on weapon systems and military strategy, I'm going to know it's a lie.
We know that these unacknowledged special access projects have used intimidation, have used threats, and at times people have been killed to maintain this secrecy. I know that this is an extreme statement to make, but I am convinced from talking to not one but dozens of military and intelligence men and women that this type of intimidation and threatening behavior has happened and continues to happen. I think this is something which is unacceptable in a democracy and in our society. Alfred Weber is a Yale Law School graduate who, while working for Stanford Research Institute, SRI, was charged with putting together the proposal during the Carter years for the official White House study of extraterrestrial intelligence. He testifies about how, at the moment that this proposal was approved by White House staff during the Carter years, that a Pentagon official appeared at Stanford Research Institute and ordered that the project be terminated, or the Pentagon would withdraw its funding for other lucrative contracts at SRI. He states that this action was not only illegal, but preempted the express desire of the Carter White House.
The goal of the study, in the context, there had been such secrecy and a gap in civilian scientific knowledge about the UFO phenomenon. And so the goal of the study was to fill the knowledge gap and to make policy recommendations for the future. It would have drawn upon the best scientific minds available, not only in the United States, but in countries around the world. This project was undertaken openly, of a civilian nature, with transparency. There was no classified aspects. It started at Stanford Research Institute in my offices. The full management of Stanford Research Institute had signed off knowingly on the proposal. Every 2 or 3 weeks I would meet with the White House staff, people in the executive office building. I was signed in and out. The structure of our proposal was that the White House would remain the overall policy director on this research proposal, which was envisioned to be about 3 years long. This project lasted from May 1977, when the initial contacts were made with the White House, until 1977, when it was terminated. The matter came under senior management when the proposal was unlawfully, in terms of illegal interference with contract relations, terminated. They had received direct communications from the Pentagon that if this study went forward, SRI's contracts with the Pentagon would be terminated. And the senior official advised me, and I'm quoting him, to dissimulate, quote, end of quote, and to just dissimulate and pretend I was going along with it, implying that I would keep my job if I did so.
He told us we could not talk about this to anyone, including any of the other crews, our spouses, our family, even amongst each other. So we could not discuss this at all.
It had been discussed with me on numerous occasions. Talked about what could happen to me militarily, and what could happen to me even if I discussed this as a civilian.
That subject just was dropped. It just wasn't discussed.
Anything to discredit you, and you'd never get a promotion, and I'd spend the next 3.5 years up at the North Pole living in a tent checking the weather balloons.
I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of it, out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government.
If their military personnel were to talk about this, they could be court-martialed, or at least threatened to be court-martialed, to get them to back down and to scare them. And other intimidations would be to hold their paychecks back, transfer them to other bases where a lot of people would not want to go to, like Alaska.
These two gentlemen began to question me about this event. And I remember, you know, saying to them, they were being pretty rough, you know, about it, to be honest with you. And I remember telling them, literally putting my hands up and going, "Wait a minute, fellas, I'm on your side." You know, whoa, just a minute, because they were not really nice. They were very intimidating and made it quite clear to the point that nothing that was seen, heard, or witnessed that transpired during that was to leave this building. You not to say a word to it about your coworkers and off base. You just forget everything you may have seen or heard or whatever concerned with this. It didn't happen. My logbook, I never did see that again. I know we had a new logbook the next day, a brand spanking new one to start with, and that disappeared. They gave me this document where for 5 years it was absolutely out of the question. I could not leave the country under any circumstances whatsoever. And to leave the state of Virginia, I had to contact the Roanoke office of the FBI and let them know if I just wanted to cross the state line down here to go into North Carolina or just leave the state of Virginia. I had to let the FBI know about it. And that was for 5 years after I was discharged.
I was arrested. I had all my gear taken from me by men in black camis, had no name tags. They were older men, probably in their late 30s or 40s. There were other people, I guess they were government, I don't know. They were there and they had containment suits. And then they took me, they put me on a cot that they had, and they had me cuffed with those, they had me cuffed both hands down, and then they had my legs tied together with those plastic fasteners that the police use. And they had a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and he did not identify himself. He might have, I just don't remember. And he told me, if we just took you out in the jungle, they'd never find you out there. And I'm like, well, and I didn't want to say, I didn't want to test him to see if he'd really do that. So I said, yeah. And he's like, you got to sign these papers, and you never saw this, and I don't exist, and this situation never happened. And if you tell anybody, you'll just come up missing. And he was a real abrasive, just a cynical asshole, I guess is the best way to put it.
And we were hit with an aerosol of some sort. I literally could see, I could hear, I could not see, and my nose ran profusely, and my chest got tight. I obviously was not getting into the car properly, so I was beaten, literally hitting in the ribs and pushed, and I was resisting. And I know Sergeant Bustinza was doing the same thing.
And he just said, look, mister, you don't go in and start any rumors and Roswell's, nothing happened out here. And he said, if you do, it'd be real serious problems. I said, I'm a civilian, you can go to hell. And that's where he said, you may be the one going to hell. And that's when he really told me, he said, somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand if you do that. So
measures have been taken by agencies to terminate people who appear to be inconvenient or troublesome through knowing too much.
I would go interview people that claimed they had seen something and try to convince them they hadn't seen something, or they were, hallucinating or something. Well, if that didn't work, another team would come in and give all the threats and threaten them, their family, and so on and so forth. And they would be in charge of discrediting them, make them look foolish, or so on and so forth. Now, if that didn't work, then there was another team that put an end to that problem, one way or the other. Secretary of Defense Forstall was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime had never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased. I said, how do you know all this? Or something to that effect. And he said, I know. He said, they'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family. Now, those were his words.
And they're yelling at me, and they're hollering and cursing, and you didn't see anything, and we'll do you and your whole goddamn family. And it was basically that for about 8 or 9 hours. These guys, they're just off on their own. There's no oversight, no control, and they just do whatever they want. They don't, and they're evil, man. These people are evil.
In the military,
they do ridicule you, because I was ridiculed a few times. I was told I would never make Master Sergeant. I was on orders for tech, but I was told I would never make Master Sergeant if I brought this crap up again.
The pilots that had seen things and talked about it, some of them were let go. Some of them released from their flying and treated as nutcases and things like that.
At times I used to carry nuclear weapons. In other words, I was mentally fit to carry nuclear weapons, but I'm not mentally fit if I see a UFO. Well, this criticism and this ridicule has, I think, done more to keep the story coming out than almost anything else.
He was sorry he wrote the book. He was sorry he exposed the family to the ridicule, to the lawsuits. It's been very tough on our entire family. He did not want to die, leaving us with these problems. Just hope that the future people such as yourself and me will know what to do with this type of knowledge that this man brought forward. I do say that he is the first man to come forward in a high capacity.
This now brings us to the very big issue of why. Why the secrecy? Why has this been kept away from the public all these years? Many witnesses feel that in the early days, in the 30s and 40s and perhaps 50s, that there was concern for how the average person would react to this information, that perhaps society was not prepared, either on a theological basis or on a social basis, an economic basis, for this information. I will not dispute that fact. I was a child in the 50s, just born in the mid-50s, and I do not know personally what the milieu was that could have affected how people would react. I will say that this is 2001 and not 1951. And in the last half century, that argument is no longer valid. The world has seen humans walk on the moon. My uncle was one of the designers of the lunar module that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. I don't believe anyone living today on this planet would be shocked to hear that there is life in the universe and that we have been visited. I do think that the reasons for secrecy evolved in the 50s up to this date, and they have much more to do with the economic order and the fact that the technologies related to these extraterrestrial vehicles, as well as human breakthroughs unrelated to these extraterrestrial vehicles, have given us energy and propulsion systems within the black budget, compartmented, unacknowledged world, which would have a significant beneficial effect for the world, but would have a deleterious short-term effect for certain special interests. I believe these special interests would include the conventional energy part of our economy, the internal combustion engines, the fossil fuel plants, gas, oil, coal, and ionizing nuclear technology related to nuclear power plants. We know that those technologies are already obsolete. I want to emphasize here that this is not a theory. We have testimony from people who have worked on these projects, within these projects, that can establish the fact that we have fully operational technologies which would enable the world to have no need for these polluting forms of energy.
The first question, and this is probably one of the major reasons why this topic has been kept quiet so long, the first question that one might ask, even the man or woman on the street is going to ask, well, if there are these peoples from other planets and they're here visiting us, how did they get here? Did they have to come at the speed of light and take 400 to hundreds of years to get here, even at the speed of light, or did they come using some other technology? Well, they're going to find out, of course, that they're using some other technology, and they don't have to travel at the speed of light. They travel at superluminal speeds, semi-instantaneously, if you want to put it in those sort of terms. And so that at that point, you can say, holy mackerel, these technologies could, if used in a peaceful way, benefit our Earth civilization in a major way. And so then where do they get the energy to travel these great speeds? And then we start to look into the energy. They aren't using jet fuel. They aren't using coal to get here. They're using technologies that the average guy on the street, the average physicist in a university doesn't have any clue about. And yet it's very real.
I believe that cold fusion has opened my eyes to yet other possibilities. In a few instances, I can say there are clearly over-unity electromagnetic devices, things that produce more electrical energy out than in. We are not in Kansas any longer. This is spectacular new physics. It indicates that some rather dramatic cracks exist in the foundations of physics. Electromagnetic theory will require radical revision.
Zero-point energy represents about 40 to 50 megawatts of power per cubic inch of space. That's a lot of power. That's 4,600 million watts of power. And if you could tap it at will, then no one would have to sell gasoline or oil anymore. You would just tap into it. It would be like taking and going out to the Great Lakes and taking out one drop and using it. You'd hardly miss it. The fabric of space is like an ocean, an energy ocean in which solid energy is floating on it, and solid energy is the mass. And if that's true, then gravity waves exist. And in fact, everything goes back to Heaviside equations, and it's waves, not particles. And the quantum is now not mass, but time. And if that's true, then there's a whole different, you look at the whole universe in a different light. And then a lot of things become possible that we think impossible within our current understanding of what time and space and thrust and force and all that is.
Yes, there is a history, a long history of over-unity systems. For example, Nikola Tesla had one. Basically, his big magnifying transformer that he had on Long Island was such an over-unity system. So this was one thing we established from the study of the foundations of electromagnetics. You are permitted to have electromagnetic systems that power themselves and their load, and you don't have to put in the energy. They take it from the vacuum, the active vacuum. The bottom line of this is if we'll initiate the negative entropy and let it go, it's just like you punched a hole in the ground and you got a big gusher of oil. You don't have to furnish the pressure and you don't have to furnish the oil. Here it comes. And it comes out in real oil that you can use. And the common dipole in every electrical circuit pours out energy in that fashion. The problem is not how to get enormous energy from the vacuum. Today, we don't have so much big kingdoms. Today, we have big economic programs, big economic countries, or basically, we have cartels. We have a whole set of cartels in an area, interlocking corporations, and behind this, we have a few people who are quite wealthy and who own most things. Historically, as far back as you want to go, we have had cartels. Any time we have a very powerful cartel or set of people that control a lot of things, that resists any means of changing its inflow of control and its inflow of funds and money and its power. You know, everybody's trying to be the big monkey. It's really as simple as that. So what we get is the great Armageddon everybody's been dreading. The energy crisis going right now, in my view, will probably evoke a great Armageddon that we've all feared so long in about 2007. I view this as the greatest strategic threat to survival of the United States and in fact of civilization itself that has ever existed in my lifetime. Now, the fools may blow the world from other causes, don't misunderstand me, but they're going to blow it from this cause. This I'm quite certain of in my own view.
Who's control of petroleum of the world? A lot of people think that Iraq, Iran, and so on and so. They don't. They don't. We control it. Us and the British interests and the world interests. Well, some people refer to this the secret government. Okay, a group of the richest men in the world control petroleum, has controlled it. And you don't need cars unless you got an internal combustion engine. Well, if you have one of these units, you know, that's about 16 inches long and about 8 inches high and about 10 inches wide, then you don't need to plug into Kit Carson, the local electric company. It burns nothing, no pollution, okay? It never wears out because there's no moving parts. What the people in power right now don't want us to know is that this free energy is available to everybody.
Mark McCandlish is an accomplished aerospace illustrator and has worked for many of the top aerospace corporations in the United States. His colleague, Brad Sorensen, with whom he studied, has been inside a facility at the then Norton Air Force Base where there were alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, that were fully operational and hovering there. In his testimony, you will learn that we not only have operational anti-gravity propulsion devices, but have had them for many, many years, and that they have been developed through the study, in part, of extraterrestrial vehicles over the past 50 years.
They had a big black curtain that divided the hangar into two different areas, and that behind these curtains was another big area, and inside this area they had all the lights turned off, and they go in, they turn the lights on, and here are 3 flying saucers floating off the floor. No cables suspended from the ceiling holding them up, no landing gear underneath, just floating, hovering above the floor. And they had little exhibits. They had a TV, a little videotape running showing the smallest of the 3 vehicles sitting out in the desert, presumably over a dry lake bed at some place like Area 51. And it showed this vehicle making 3 little quick hopping motions like that, and then accelerating straight up and out of sight until you couldn't see it, and completely disappearing from view in just a couple of seconds. I mean, just boom, no sound, no sonic boom, nothing. They had a cutaway illustration, pretty much like the one I'll show you in a little bit, that showed what the internal components of this vehicle were, and they had some of the panels taken off so you could actually look in and see oxygen tanks and a little robotic arm that could extend out from the side of the vehicle for collecting samples and things. So obviously, this is a vehicle that not only is capable of flying around through the atmosphere, but it's also capable of going out to space and collecting samples. And it's using a type of propulsion system that doesn't make any noise. As far as he could see, it had no moving parts, and didn't have any exhaust gases or fuel to be expended. It was just there, hovering. Well, the synthetic vision system that's on the AR, what they called the alien reproduction vehicle, it was also nicknamed the Flux Liner. This anti-gravity propulsion system, this flying saucer, one of 3 that were in this hangar at Norton Air Force Base. This synthetic vision system uses the same kind of technology as the gun slaving system that they have in the Apache helicopter, except in this case you have 2 cameras, and it picks any pair of the cameras in that pattern of 6 that are around the circumference, including the one on the top. Whichever pair most closely matches the orientation of the pilot's head. This shows the cutaway. You can see the 4 ejection seats. Actually, there are 2 facing us, but there are also 2 that are sort of facing away from us on the other side of that central column. You can see the oxygen tanks down here in the corner that actually go all the way around the inside of the skirt. There's also another set of oxygen tanks that are inside the crew compartment sphere. Brad said a couple things about this system. Now, I should also describe, he said there were 3 vehicles. The first one, the smallest one, the one was partially taken apart, the one that was shown in the video that was running in this hangar, November 12, 1988 at Norton Air Force Base. was about 24 feet in diameter at its widest part, right at the base of that flange. The next biggest one was 60 feet in diameter at the base. Oh, by the way, and the largest of the three vehicles was about 120 to 130 feet in diameter. I mean, that's massive when you think about it. It's just huge. Brad said that in this exhibit at Norton Air Force Base that a three-star general said that these vehicles were capable of doing light speed or better. I said, well, so when did you see this? And he says, I saw it in 1973. I said, well, where? When? How do you know? When did you see it? He says, well, I was a crew chief. He said, I worked on Bill Scott's plane when he was a test pilot. And he says, one night my ship supervisor said to me, go out to North Base. They've got a power unit out there, a ground power unit for an aircraft that's leaking or failed or something. So we need to take a tow vehicle out there, go out, pick it up, bring it back. Well, instead, what happened is he comes up off the dry lake bed, rolls right up on the tarmac, and is going down these rows of hangars. They're all Quonset-style hangars back then. And he stops in front of the first one with the doors cracked, expecting to find this defective ground power unit. And what does he see? He sees this flying saucer sitting in the hangar, hovering off the ground. So I said, well, what happened? He says, well, this thing, was flat on the bottom, sloping sides, had little cameras in these little plastic domes all over, and there was a door on the side. And he says, I wasn't there for 15 seconds, and I heard footsteps running up to me. Before I could even turn around and look, he says, there was a machine gun barrel at my throat, another one over here, and he says, a gruff voice says, close your eyes and get on the ground, or we're going to blow your head off. So they put a hood over his head, blindfolded him, hauled him off, and they spent 18 hours debriefing him.
I can discuss Norton Air Force Base, and that as a result of all the military airlift command bases under me for their facilities, that there was one facility at Norton Air Force Base that was close hold. Not even the wing commander there could know what was going on. And during that time period, throughout my career, it was always rumored by the pilots that that was a cover for, in fact, a location of one UFO craft. And the reason for that location was folks that could come out, land at Norton, play golf, be part of a golf tournament, and so forth, and during that process could go by the facility and actually see the UFO.
Don Phillips is an Air Force military man. He worked with Kelly Johnson at the Skunk Works, Lockheed, as a young man. His testimony is conclusive. He goes into tremendous detail about the fact that we not only have these devices, that we have studied them, and that we have had tremendous technological advances from the study of these extraterrestrial vehicles.
I know there were two prominent people that to this day I still know that founded what we call Area 51. They're two friends. The idea that there is craft being worked on is not just an idea. Yes, there was craft there. I've talked to others that have worked on it. There's different levels there. What you see on the surface is not representative of all of the research areas that are there. One of our contract scientists for our private concern, Light City Technologies Incorporated, he worked with them. He worked with a couple of those technologies while he was with a very prominent intelligence agency of the United States government. We put it to use, but it took us a long time to figure out what it was and then figure out how we can use it and then what to use it for. And are those products useful for humanity?
In conclusion, I would like to state that this is a matter of the utmost significance to the American people, but also to peoples throughout the world. We can establish now that we are not alone. It can be proven that there are technologies which could give us a new and sustainable civilization. And we are certain that the secrecy surrounding this issue constitutes a threat to the national security and to the security of the whole entire world. Specific actions which I would recommend. I would recommend that our scientific institutions, such as the National Science Foundation, the National Academy of Sciences, and others around the world, look into this subject with an impartial and objective view to getting to the bottom of the facts. You cannot dismiss over 100 people's testimony who range from brigadier generals to colonels to air traffic controllers at strategic air command facilities in a cavalier fashion. There can be no denying that there is something going on. It at the minimum deserves a serious, well-funded scientific inquiry. In addition, I believe that the United States Congress and the United Nations, as well as the parliaments of the United Kingdom and other advanced countries, need to have hearings on this subject. There are thousands prospective witnesses to this whole matter. They will come forward if they are protected, if there is an official and serious and honest inquiry that is oriented towards getting to the truth. In addition, I ask that the President of the United States take executive action to form a commission to openly study this matter, and also that he issue executive orders releasing people from national security oaths or penalties for coming forward with information regarding these projects. It is my opinion that because these projects have escaped appropriate legal constitutional oversight, they are a priori null and void from a legal point of view. However, many of the witnesses would feel more comfortable coming forward if there was action on their behalf by the President as well as by the Congress. I also wish to emphasize that the President of the United States needs to be fully informed on these and related issues. We have learned that a number of presidents in the past, through high-level contacts to them, have been left in the dark on this very important issue. This cannot be allowed to continue. Lastly, I would welcome the input from scientists, from government officials around the world, so that we can cooperate in any way possible to allow this information to come forward. I would also invite other people who may gain access to this briefing video to contact me if they are a witness, if they have been within the military, the intelligence, or corporate world and have had direct first-hand knowledge of these projects. It is only through many people coming together courageously that we will be able to establish the truth and create the world that we wish to have for our children and our children's children. Thank you very much.
This whole project of bringing this out in the open will probably take other people too. But myself, I'm 73 years old, and I've had a good life and no regrets, and I've loved this country, and I've been a Christian all my life since I was about 11 years old, and so I believe God wants this known. I believe the cosmos wants this known.
It was a real eye-opener, how deep the secrecy goes, how deep the cover-up is.
It still bothers me that I've seen all this, I know all this, and like I'm walking around like with the answer, and nobody wants to ask the question to get the answer, and it kind of irritates me a little bit.
If the truth is going to come out sooner or later.
I think it's long past time to open this up to the public.
I think it's time for us to act to end this charade.
It's definitely time to make this disclosure on this. It's been kept secret too long.
One of the things that I'm upset about is that good people are forced to do illegal things, and I believe that this information should be given to the American public.
Give us information to the young people of the world in this country. They want to hear it. They want it. Give it to them. Don't hide it and tell lies and make stories. They're not stupid.
Eventually, when there's going to be something happen that will make all of them have egg all over their face, and they're going to have to admit that they haven't been truthful at all.
This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers.
It's the discovery of the lifetime of humankind, isn't it? To find out that we're not here alone.
It's a truth that the entire world has to be informed about, and that truth is man is not alone.
People are walking around in a daze. They have no idea what is going on. No idea.